In the dead of night, when the world held its breath beneath the roar of distant artillery, one man slipped through the chaos, alone, unseen, but never unafraid. What he carried was not just a rifle, but a secret that could change the fate of thousands. December 1944. The Ardennes forest was a frozen labyrinth, cloaked in shadows and snow, a place where even the bravest dared to tread lightly. The bitter cold seeped through every layer of clothing, biting at exposed skin like a relentless predator. The ground was hard, unforgiving, coated in a thin layer of ice that glittered faintly beneath the overcast sky. Private First Class James Jimmy Callahan pressed his back against the rough bark of a towering oak tree, heart hammering beneath the weight of his heavy pack. His breath came in ragged puffs, clouds of vapor dissolving quickly into the frigid air. Around him, the sounds of war echoed faintly. The distant thuds of artillery, the sharp crack of rifle fire, the low murmur of voices that drifted like ghosts through the forest. Jimmy's unit had been ordered to hold the ridge overlooking a narrow pass, a strategic point that could change the course of the Battle of the Bulge. But the Germans were advancing faster than anyone had predicted. The encirclement was tightening, and their radios had fallen silent, swallowed by static and chaos. His fingers trembled inside his gloves as he checked his rifle again, the cold metal biting into his skin. He glanced around, eyes searching the gloom for any sign of movement. Shadows shifted between the trees. Friend or foe, he couldn't tell. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a stone. A sudden rustle behind him made Jimmy whirl around. Corporal Reed emerged from the underbrush, blood smeared across his face and a grimace etched deep into his features. "We can't hold them much longer," Reed whispered, clutching his bleeding arm. "Orders are to fall back, but the path's cut off. You're the only one who can get through." Jimmy swallowed hard, the lump in his throat heavy and unwelcome. "I'll do it, for all of us." The words felt like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. The night swallowed him as he slipped away from the ridge, each step measured and silent. His boots sank slightly into the snow, the crunch masked by distant explosions. His breath hitched in his chest with every snap of a twig, every rustle of a leaf. He was alone, but the memory of his brothers in arms pressed against his skin like a ghostly presence. Memories flickered through his mind, his mother's smile before he left home, the laughter of his little sister, the promise to his father that he'd come back safe. But those were distant dreams now, fragile and fading beneath the brutal reality of war. The forest seemed endless, a maze of frozen trees and shadows. The bitter wind whipped through the branches, carrying the faint scent of gunpowder and smoke. Jimmy's muscles ached, his lungs burned with cold, but he pressed on, driven by a fierce determination. Voices sharp and clipped. Jimmy froze, heart pounding in his throat. He pressed himself flat against a fallen log, barely daring to breathe. The patrol passed inches away, unaware of the American soldiers so close. Time slowed to an agonizing crawl. When their footsteps faded, Jimmy exhaled slowly and continued. Every step was a gamble, every breath a battle against fear. Hours blurred together. The cold gnawed at him relentlessly, but Jimmy's mind focused on one goal: to reach the command post and deliver the warning that could save lives. At last, he came upon a frozen river, the natural boundary between enemy territory and safety. Moonlight peeked through thick clouds, glinting off the icy surface like shards of glass. German guards patrolled the far bank, shadows moving in patterns that sent icy fingers down Jimmy's spine. He crouched low, muscles coiled like a spring, waiting for the right moment. When the guards shifted their attention elsewhere, Jimmy made his move, darting across the ice with silent precision, the cold biting into his fingertips as he fought to keep balance. On the other side, faint lights marked the American command post. Relief surged through him, but he knew his mission wasn't over. Bursting into the tent, Jimmy caught the startled eyes of the officers inside. His voice was hoarse but urgent as he relayed the situation: the enemy's approach, the trapped unit, the desperate need for reinforcements. For a moment, disbelief hung in the air. Then orders were barked, radios crackled to life, and men began to mobilize. Jimmy slumped against the tent wall, exhaustion overwhelming him. The weight of what he carried, the lives depending on him, settled like a stone in his chest. Outside, the first hints of dawn brushed the horizon with pale light. The frozen forest remained silent, waiting for the battle to come. Jimmy closed his eyes, bracing for the storm ahead. Because in war, valor often walks alone. They say heroes are born in battle, but sometimes heroism is found in the silence between the gunfire, where fear meets resolve and a single choice decides everything. Jimmy's warning had sparked a flurry of activity. Orders crackled through radios, engines roared as reinforcements scrambled to the ridge. But back in the forest, the battle was far from over. The cold bit deep into every soldier's skin. Snow crunched underfoot, mixing with the relentless staccato of gunfire. The ridge, once a hopeful vantage point, had become a frozen tomb, carved with sacrifice and desperation. Jimmy watched from the command post as troops hurried toward the embattled position. Yet, despite the flurry of movement, dread clung to him like a shadow. The woods beyond held enemies and memories that refused to fade. Back on the ridge, Corporal Reed fought fiercely alongside the remaining men. Bloodied and bruised, he pushed forward, eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of relief. The freezing wind whipped through the shattered trees, carrying the cries of the wounded and the relentless thunder of battle. Suddenly, a blast shattered the night. Reed was thrown to the ground, pain exploding in his side. He gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. His vision blurred, but his thoughts stayed clear. He had to hold on. Meanwhile, Jimmy sat in the command post, mind racing. He couldn't shake the image of Reed's determined face, the weight of every man left behind. The knowledge that his own escape meant survival at a cost gnawed at him. But there was no time for doubt. Hours stretched into a brutal dawn. The bitter cold showed no mercy, freezing fingers and hearts alike. Allied tanks rumbled through the valley below, their engines growling like beasts waking from a long slumber. The tide was turning. Reinforcements arrived in force, their presence breathing new life into the defenders. The German assault faltered, battered by the sudden surge. Jimmy grabbed his gear and raced toward the ridge, desperate to find Reed and the others. The forest was scarred, trees shattered, earth churned, the air thick with smoke and sorrow. He stumbled over fallen comrades, calling out names swallowed by the chaos. His heart ached with every unanswered call. Then, in a small clearing, Jimmy found Reed. The corporal lay motionless beneath a shattered branch, his breath shallow, eyes glazed with pain and fatigue. Jimmy knelt beside him, pressing his hand to Reed's chest. "Hold on, buddy," Jimmy whispered, voice breaking. "Help's here." Reed managed a faint smile, fingers twitching in silent farewell. Jimmy stayed by his friend's side as medics arrived, the bitter cold mingling with the warmth of fleeting hope. The cost was clear. Many wouldn't make it home. But those who survived carried the weight of sacrifice with them. As the sun rose, painting the sky with hues of orange and crimson, Jimmy stood atop the ridge. The battle was won, but scars remained, etched in frozen ground and deeper still in the souls of the men who fought. He thought of the quiet valor that often went unseen, the choices made in the shadows, the courage in silence. Jimmy realized then that heroism wasn't about glory or medals. It was about walking through the darkest nights, carrying the lives of others on your back, and never losing sight of hope. The forest fell silent once more, but the echoes of that night would never fade. If this story moved you, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to Echoes of Humanity 577, where the unheard finally have a voice.